Well, we're so far away from the liquor store here, you know.
Oh,
I
yeah.
dry more herbs than
Yeah.
I tincture, and as a matter of fact, it wasn't until a couple of years ago, and it was 2 years ago before I ever even started tincturing. Everything up until that point in time I had done more traditionally, which had just been dried. Um, Hence all the dried herbs around in the cabinets, and um, here and there, tucked here and there, because I run out of room to put the herbs. There's so many dried ones.
Right.
And I have found, it's been interesting, and maybe this is a difference I really find between the North and the South, is that we dry a lot more herbs in the South, and they tincture a lot more herbs up North. And I mean, hugely difference,
Yeah.
I notice. And one aspect of that is that when I've talked about drying herbs, when I've like taught in Boston or taught in Pennsylvania or some of these other places, towns I've taught in, they talk about it takes too long for the herbs to dry. You know, they don't. Their climate is too cool and damp, so the herbs don't dry as well. Where you know here you just they're dry. Put them on the table, they're dry. I mean, look at these. This crossvine has dried very beautifully, and I just left it out on the table for about 4 days. You know, and it just dries.
In Minnesota, we don't have too much trouble with drying because we're out onto the edge of the prairie, so that's not a problem. But in the north, there's kind of more of a tradition of chemical industrial lifestyle. Like Bitter Life Through Chemistry is definitely not a southern.
No, it's not.
For some reason, as time passed, the people liked the idea of tinctures and got that going, and that actually does reflect, again, what was done back before the herb renaissance, back before the dark ages in the north where there weren't herbs there, that the old practitioners, the eclectics particularly, they made tinctures, and we used to actually get a certain number of tinctures from the homeopathic pharmacies. We'd get mother tinctures of different things. They'd send us. And they'd, you know, it was somewhat limited number, but we could get some, like wild lettuce. We got our wild lettuce tincture. We could only get it from a homeopathic company in those days.
Well, I think there is a difference in effect, definitely. You know, water and alcohol are both absorbed through the lining of the stomach, so the absorption of both can be pretty quick. But I think water-based liquids kind of drive the herbs more toward the kidneys, and the alcohol kind of drives the herbs more toward the liver, you know. So I think that's a difference, you know, and they kind of then hit the body from those two different routes. So I think that's a difference. You know, some herbs I know are fat soluble. And if they're fat soluble, don't they do a little bit better in tincture, you know, in alcohol?
Or else just in a salve or
Or
oil.
just in a salve or an oil. But, you know, I think most herbs do well as teas. They get into the system really quick because they've been cooked and kind of partially broken down, and they're more easily to assimilate.
Yeah, I'd say you know, the northern method, I think, is kind of based on science, and a lot of that's not well thought through. It's not the way I make herbs. I make herbs in brandy. There's at least two different traditions of using alcohol. One is the old monastic method, where they made their drinks and their foods and their herbs all kind of intermixed, and they really had a lot of medicinal wines and medicinal beers, and you read those in Culpeper often. In fact, he often will give it in a beer or wine, and which has kind of died out. And in my thinking, that's what I like to do. I like to make a tincture that tastes good, and that brings out the flavor of the remedy. And I just have this superstition that the flavor carries the essence or the properties of the plant, that you ought to be able to taste that plant pretty well.
Right.
And so I don't want to bury it under the alcohol. And when you use these grain alcohol, high proof, etc., there's a couple of things. There's a couple of problems with that method, I personally believe. One thing that's interesting is a lot of the standard extracts are made from dried herbs, so they're already dried. I always try to make it from the fresh herb. And if you're making a fresh herb, you do get a lot of extra taste often in a fresh herb that you don't get in a dried herb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean with the alcohol?
Yeah, with the alcohol, probably some with teas too.
Yeah, I agree.
And I mean, I would say generally for most things, not everything, probably your most potent herb is picking it fresh right off the boom, there it is, that's the best. And everything from there on down is really kind of a deterioration. Very often, not always. I can really see it with wild yam because you got such a hard root. Even when you take it out of the ground, that root is so hard that I could see cooking something that was really hard could change it, or something like oak bark. Again, you could really maybe get a different set of properties when you cooked it.